We gather this hour.
We gather this hour.
We gather this hour.
We gather this hour as people of faith.
As people of faith.
As people of faith.
As people of faith.
With joys and sorrows.
With joys and sorrows.
With joys and sorrows.
Gifts and needs.
Gifts and needs.
Gifts and needs.
We light this beacon of hope.
We light this beacon of hope.
We light this beacon of hope.
Sign of our quest for truth and meaning.
Sign of our quest for truth and meaning.
In celebration.
In celebration.
In celebration.
Of the life we share together.
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 We share together.
We share together.
We share together.
Yes.
So friends, in the last couple of weeks, after a more than a year of relative social isolation, I have received several social invitations. From simple one-on-one lunches or coffees to larger gatherings of 15 or even 20 people. And as we, at least here in the United States, are perhaps beginning to emerge from this pandemic, we are longing to reconnect to those we have not seen, save for the occasional Zoom call. So on the one hand, I am so very delighted to be receiving those invitations. I miss people. I miss people in 3 dimensions. I miss the energy that moves among and between people. And as much as I love seeing everyone's faces on our Zoom calls, I don't get the energy moving back and forth. So I miss that. But still, I have to admit that all those invitations are incredibly overwhelming to me. And I can feel this sense of unease in my body when all those invitations arrive. Yes, there's this tension, right? Yes, I want to see everyone and be with anyone. And my body is telling me, maybe not everyone, and maybe not everyone all at once, all in one week. My body is signaling that I ought to take it a bit more slowly. Maybe just one of those lunches this week. And maybe next week, I'll have the energy for lunch and a coffee. Now, I'm guessing you recognize this reaction of mine. Maybe it's similar to your own, or maybe it's completely opposite, but you've heard it from friends. So I'm an introvert, and that term gets, introversion and extroversion, I think gets misconstrued in our general culture a lot. So for me, the best understanding of introversion and extroversion lies in thinking about where folks get their energy and where what feeds them emotionally and spiritually, and then also where that gets depleted. And so for introverts like me, and as we discovered, as we realized this week, everyone in my household, save for our Boston Terrier is definitely an extrovert, but the rest of us are introverts. Social interactions are energetically depleting, which is not to say that we don't like social interaction. We love it, we do. It's just to say that our social interactions pull energy from us. And at the end of them, we are left exhausted and we need time alone to gain our reserves. Right? Now, extroverts, if you're on the extroverted side of that equation, you work the other way. Social interaction is what feeds energy into your body and soul. For an extrovert, being alone is energetically exhausting. Now, of course, like everything else, these are not binaries. You can't just be one or the other. It all falls in the spectrum. And guess what? You move along that spectrum depending on the context and the day. But some of us are more or less to one side and more or less to the other of those two poles. So I invite you to think about those two poles, those two ends, in terms of what we all have been through this year and what that means as we emerge from all the traumas of this pandemic. For many of the introverts I have spoken to recently, this year of social isolation has not been energetically awful, since we recharge our energies in isolation. Telling us to stay home and stay away from people didn't really deplete us. But on the other side, I can well imagine, and I've spoken with a lot of extroverts, that the kind of isolation, of course, is going to be utterly exhausting if where you get your energy is being with people and you're told you can't be with people. That's going to be an incredibly exhausting experience for this long, right? So I was trying to think of what that energetic equivalent of that would be for my introverted self. So what it would feel like to be an extroverted, isolated for a year. And for an introvert like myself, I think it would be akin to forcing me to attend a party with 500 people every day for 15 months. I would be a puddle, utterly depleted. So I want to remind you that the roots of the word pandemic mean all people. The pan part, the pan of pandemic means all, and demos means people, like demos as in democracy, meaning the people, right? So pandemic means all people. So in the general use of that term is that we've been using, of course, is referencing this COVID-19 virus and how it has spread to and affected all people across the globe. But we, particularly in this country, have been living into multiple pandemics, not just a public health viral one, right? There has been and continues to be a pandemic of racial justice. Few can say that they have not been affected one way or another by the extrajudicial killings of Black and brown bodies, for example. And in this last year, there has been a pandemic surrounding that 2020 presidential election and its aftermath. And there have been a host of large and small hits on all our fried edges. There has been this pandemic of uncertainty, all people feeling pretty uncertain about what's next, and a creeping doubt of who we can claim as an authority. In other words, this pandemic, as I have begun to understand it, isn't merely about a virus. This pandemic is about a loss of trust, political trust, social trust, economic trust, perhaps even spiritual trust. And friends, the pandemic is not over. And so in these last couple of weeks, I have been feeling all of that and noticing all of that in people over these last days. As we begin to emerge from pandemic, we are crispy. Crispy. Now, that might not be a term that you have been using to describe the energy around us as we emerge. Your ministerial intern, Heather Petit, and I, however, have been using it a lot. It shows up in our conversations. It sounds like this. Heather, how you doing today? I'm feeling crispy. Like, oh yeah, I'm feeling crispy too. Heather has this lovely definition of it. She says, crispy's like this. She says, my edges are burned from either one very searing experience or many other smaller things frying me in the same way, or in the case of this last year, both at the same time. And if the crispy parts of me crack open from being hit by something, it hurts. So I tend to be prickly about defending them. It's legitimate pain though, actual cracks in my being when those edges break. Crispy. Crispy is the tension, this is me, crispy is the tension that I feel when invited to multiple social occasions, and I'm both wanting to say yes to reconnect with all those folks I love, and still something begs me to take it slow. Crispy is my ungraceful response to an email this week when I was feeling overwhelmed and rushed. My wife, Caroline, worked the polls during the Pennsylvania primary this week, and she noticed very clearly the irritation of folks who expected everyone to be wearing masks, even if they were vaccinated. And she also noted very many voters angry still about the November election and how it was run. Folks voting this week in Pennsylvania were crispy. Crispy comes from both our defensiveness of those fried edges in our being and our inadvertent hurts as we negotiate our emergence. We are fried and we are out of practice. We are burnt and distrustful. We are edgy and cracking and so fragile. And in thinking about fragility and emergence, I was reminded this week of that story, that little story in the novel Zorba the Greek by Katsanakis. And he wrote this. He said, I remember one morning when I discovered a cocoon in the back of a tree just as a butterfly was making a hole in its case and preparing to come out. I waited a while, but it was too long appearing and I was impatient. I bent over it and breathed on it to warm it. I warmed it as quickly as I could, and the miracle began to happen before my eyes, faster than life. The case opened and the butterfly started slowly crawling out, and I shall never forget my horror when I saw how its wings were folded back and crumpled. The wretched butterfly tried with its whole trembling body to unfold them. And bending over it, I tried to help it with my breath. In vain. It needed to be hatched out patiently, and the unfolding of the wings should be a gradual process in the sun. Now it was too late. My breath had forced the butterfly to appear all crumpled before its time. It struggled desperately, and a few seconds later, died in the palm of my hand. Friends, I feel the wisdom of this story in this, our moment of emergence. We need to be patient with one another. We need deep grace. We need to offer the grace of time for us to unfold our new selves after this long annihilation. We need to offer one another the grace to name and mourn our losses and not compare or judge who has lost more, knowing we have all lost something. We need to offer the grace of joy when we gather in real life, as they say, and the grace to give folks their space as they need. We need to offer the grace of incredible inconsistency. I'll say that again, the grace of incredible inconsistency. There will be days when all we desire is a hug from an old friend, and days when that hug comes with terrible anxiety, and that might even be on the same day. A little grace for both possibilities, all at the same time. And we need to offer the grace of forgiveness for the sharp edges that we carry and that sometimes wound each other. We need to offer the grace of encouragement for those who draw their emotional and spiritual energy from their social interactions. And we need to offer the grace of space for those whose energy is depleted in those same interactions. We need to remember that we, demos, the people, have all, pan, been living in a host of searing experiences, annihilating experiences, and we have lived through them. And still through that living, we are emerging, fragile and crispy, and so ready to be whole again. Friends, let us then be graceful to remember that we are awakening to love and to invite one another gently, patiently into our new life. Amen. And I love you. And may we live in blessing.